I'm John Opdyke. I'm the president of Open Primaries. Welcome everybody to today's Zoom call. I think this is our 8th entry into our summer virtual discussion series. Just to reiterate what Russell said, the way today is going to go is I'm going to introduce our guests, ask them several questions, and after about 15 minutes, I'll open it up for your questions. To ask a question, simply type your name, your state, and a one-sentence synopsis of what you want to ask in the chat section of Zoom, and then I'll call on you. I'm not going to ask your question for you. I'll call on you, take you off mute, and then you can ask your question. So let's get into it. So we're talking about Alaska. Alaska, as most of you know, is an extremely independent state. It actually has the highest percentage of voters who are not registered Democrat or Republican of any state in the country, over 60%. For 50 years, Alaska had a blanket open primary where all voters were treated equally. Everyone could go on primary day and vote for whoever they wanted in every election. This form, the blanket open primary, was ruled unconstitutional back in 2001. And Alaska was forced to enact partisan primaries where the parties got to decide who got to vote and who couldn't vote. Well, hopefully that's going to change this November. Alaskans for Better Elections is a ballot committee that's come together over the past year to place an innovative amendment on the 2020 ballot. It's called Amendment 2, and it combines strong financial disclosure rules with a top 4 nonpartisan primary and ranked choice voting in the general election. So let's take a quick look at a video from the campaign before I introduce our guests today. Russell?
Fed up with Juneau? They can't balance a budget, let alone make a difference for Alaska families. It's no surprise. Right now, our election system ignores Alaskans' voices and rewards millions in unaccountable outside spending. But this year, we can help fix the problem and build a better Alaska by voting yes on Measure 2. What does Measure 2 do? It's a common sense reform to our elections. First, Measure 2 gives every Alaskan an opportunity to make their voice heard by allowing all Alaskans to vote in primary elections for whatever candidate they prefer, no matter if they think of themselves as a Republican, Independent, or a Democrat. Second, it puts more power in the hands of Alaskans, letting general election voters rank their top choices, so we won't have to vote for the lesser of two evils, and ensuring the winning candidate is supported by a majority. And third, Measure 2 protects the integrity and fairness of our elections by shining a light on dark money special interest spending, because Alaskans have a right to know who is influencing campaigns. Altogether, these reforms return power to regular Alaskans by making campaigns transparent, giving us better choices, and making sure Alaskans' voices are heard. So this November, let's vote for better elections, for a better Alaska. Vote yes on Measure 2. Paid for by Yes on 2 for Better Elections. Top 3 contributors: Unite America, Action Now Initiative, and Represent Us.
All right, so I'm extremely pleased to welcome Alaskans for Better Elections campaign manager, Shea Siegert, the campaign counsel and former chief of staff to Governor Bill Walker, Scott Kendall, and former independent state representative and the campaign co-chair, Jason Grenn. Welcome, Shea, Scott, and Jason. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, John. Really happy for us to be here. I see some pretty familiar names, and one in particular I love the opportunity to be in front of is Dr. Fields and everyone on this call. This is quite the call, and it's amazing what you guys are doing. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So you guys are running a really innovative effort. It's a first in the nation campaign. You're combining 3 separate election reforms: open primaries, nonpartisan primaries, ranked choice voting, and strong financial disclosure, dark money disclosure. So you won a very important court case last month in which the court said, this approach is legal, you can do this. So now that the legal hurdles have been overcome, what do you see, big strokes here, as both the biggest challenges and also the biggest opportunities with this combo package that you're presenting to the voters?
Yeah, I want to toss that over to Scott Kendall, legal counsel and drafter of the initiative. I think he'll have a good insight, and I'll follow up with an answer after that.
Yeah, this is Scott. What happened was the state attorney general, very partisan individual, very partisan administration, basically didn't want this to go forward, and they cobbled together this challenge based on the single subject rule. They said every part of this is a different subject. We said election reform is one subject. We won in Superior Court. We won in Supreme Court. We won so resoundingly on a constitutional basis. We just found out yesterday that both the Superior Court and the Supreme Court have to pay all of our legal fees. So a resounding victory there. We also got past the legislative session because there's sort of not a legislative veto, but a legislative override where they can attempt to pass something that attacks the problem in a similar fashion and then strips us from the ballot. And in the past, the legislature's done that because they can do that and then immediately repeal it in the new session in January. But they can't with a ballot measure. Ballot measure is constitutionally protected for 2 years from the effective date. So if we get this through, we get the 2022 elections under this system. And we think that's the big opportunity is, from what we've seen around the country, I'm not aware of any instance where the voters were given this power and gave it back. Once they get it, they want it, they want to keep it. Right. And that's the opportunity, right? Because 62% of Alaskans not affiliated with either party. Even some members, the parties themselves are somewhat fractured, as is the case on the national level. So you really see people with this hunger to put everything on the menu. And I think that's the opportunity is, we're taking some Republicans, we're taking a healthy share of Democrats, we're taking a big chunk out of the independents in the middle. And we just think once we hand this system over, it's about as Alaskan as can be to say, we don't do things the way anyone else does. We don't vote straight tickets here, which I've actually been involved in a recount, hand recount of every ballot statewide. And it's true. Those ballots look like nothing you've ever seen before. Alaskans, this is something Alaskans really want. And they want that ability in primary elections to vote for Lisa Murkowski for Senate, but then the Democrat maybe in the state house race. And that's what we're going to give them.
And so to give you a list of, those were the challenges we made it through as a campaign. We reigned successful. The next challenge is getting to 183,000 votes on November 3rd. We, like Scott said, we have the opportunity with 62% of registered voters in the state of Alaska choosing not to register with either party. The only opposition that's unfunded at the moment right now is the Alaska Republican Party, but really just the chairman, because he decided to make a top-down decision on what the party felt on this ballot measure. So when we're going forward, we're talking about empowering Alaska voters. We're talking about the voice, choice, and power and transparency that the voters will get through these simple changes, and that's exactly it. These are simple updates to reform our election system.
Got it. That sounds very exciting. Let me get deeper into this. What both of you mentioned about the depths of political independence in Alaska. So, as both of you mentioned, 62% of voters in Alaska are independents or member of minor parties. Jason, you were elected as an independent. Senator Murkowski was elected as an independent write-in. I actually did a little looking on Ballotpedia, and 2 of the last 7 governors in Alaska have been independents. So how do you, not just in terms of raw numbers, but this seems like a cultural phenomenon. The state and the people, Alaskans, seem very committed to being an independent. How do you think about that in terms of the Amendment 2 campaign? Is that relevant? Is that going to shape how you go out there? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, John, I want to give that question to Jason Grenn. Jason ran in 2016 and coalesced his district and the voters in his district around the idea that people can work hard and hard work is more important than partisanship. And so I would like Jason to talk to the independent landscape of Alaska and how we put our state first and party second.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. As a fourth generation Alaskan, consider myself, deeply rooted here and know people and care about what's going on. And didn't really have a lot of political background or aspirations when I chose to run back in 2016. But when I did, previously I was a registered Republican, but wanted to serve as someone who would be able to talk to all of my neighbors, talk to all of the stakeholders, people who were invested in the state. And so ran as a nonpartisan candidate. And really what I found was when I went door to door, I didn't have to go narrowly talk to one side or the other. I had to talk to every single one of my neighbors, regardless of the letter next to their name, on the registration sheet. And what I found then was that there was so much common ground, and it sounds cliche, but it really is. Once you start talking to people, you can find, so many things you agree with. And even when you don't, what people do see is that you're a neighbor just like them. You care about what's going on in the community, you care about what's going on in the state, and you start to chip away at some of the, what color are you, what jersey are you wearing type of mentality. But as a candidate, you have to show that. You just can't fake that through social media or postcards. You have to really show that. And so once you start talking to people, listening to people, man, it really does make a difference when you just start, getting rid of a letter next to your name and you start wanting to talk about solutions and talking about progress and the betterment of your community. And so my district back in 2016, it did, it's red, but it's kind of a purple district. It did vote for Trump, but it also voted for me. And I took that as something to be said that people, saw me as a neighbor, saw me worthy of their vote. And you had to earn those votes. There's nothing down ticket. They just don't go, okay, I just always vote Republican or always vote Democrat. You have to earn those as an independent. And that, I think, is very Alaskan, is when you start working with people, talking to people, they really do care about the person who is in front of them talking and representing them in our state capitol, not just the letter next to their name. So I think that's going to be the big advantage when we talk to especially independents and even, Republicans and Democrats. They say, does this work for me? Does this work for our state? Not, does it work for my party? And how do I progress that? But how does it progress and improve the state?
Got it.
Yeah, this is Scott. I think Jason made great points, but there's a little bit of Alaska history that I think he hit on that I sort of want to encapsulate real quick. Is Alaska is very much seen as a red state, but its DNA is not, once it was very, very Democratic, then it's elected Republicans. But people sort of forget that we had open primaries until 2000 or 2002. And we had Republicans like Senator Ted Stevens. Senator Ted Stevens, famously Republican, but he was pro-choice. But his best friend was Daniel Inouye from Hawaii. But when I went to Senator Stevens' funeral in 2010, who gave the eulogy? Joe Biden gave his eulogy. We had very different Republicans here. And we had a lot of working across the aisle. We had a lot of coalition governments. And then we saw something start to change here. And it sort of unfortunately happened after Governor Palin was nominated to run as vice president. We saw our Republican Party go from kind of this, call it working class and combination of working class and Chamber of Commerce type Republicans to this Tea Party splinter, which was just kind of poised to take advantage of the closed primary system. So in 2010, we saw Senator Murkowski lose her primary, broadly popular official, most popular elected official in the state, but loses by a couple thousand votes in that closed primary. Runs as a write-in, and only the second write-in to win statewide in the nation's history, but the very first write-in to win actually against both parties, legitimate Democrat, legitimate Republican candidates, and she wins through there. And that was, Alaskans kind of pushing back. So that was that experience in 2010, I think, bakes in the idea of open primaries. When you think about the ranked choice voting, Alaska's experienced a number of these weirdo three-way races. Most recently, we had a governor's race that was very demoralizing to voters because we had independent Governor Walker up for re-election, and then we had a very hard right Republican, and then a Democrat, Mark Begich, got in the race. And what we actually saw was turnout just went into the toilet because people were like, whoever I vote for, we're going to lose. And ultimately, that's kind of what happened, which isn't to say a Republican can't win statewide, but we had, by all accounts, the furthest right statewide candidate we'd ever had. And he won in a walk because, there was a first past the post system, and it was a zero-sum game where these the independent and the Democrat just fought for 6 months, and he literally did not show up at debates because he didn't have to. So that's sort of the RCV wing. And then in 2014, you know, all along, but really starting in 2014, we saw the impetus for this dark money, which was the Senate race against Mark Begich and Senator Sullivan, was at the time, and I'm not sure this is still the case, we had 56 million in total money come in, which at the time was an all-time record for the amount of money spent per voter. When you think about, you know, 350,000 voters show up and you spent $56 million. I mean, you can just imagine what that felt like on the ground here. And so you have this sort of moderate history of Alaska that's really taken a turn in the last decade. And I think that's what makes it authentic for this to be kind of the natural reaction back. We didn't have a problem before. Now the parties have created the problem and we're just taking it back.
And so, you know, Jason and Scott are pretty smart, and I'm just a kind of country bumpkin with a nice haircut. And when I talk to people about open primaries, I talk about creating a standard for candidates to get to the general. If you're going to be a candidate in the state of Alaska in an election, you need to run in a primary. You need to get votes just like every other candidate. You can't just get petition signatures like Jason and I did in 2016. And creating that standard and making sure that we're not treating any candidate different based on the party they belong to, and not treating any voter different based on the party they belong to, is really important. So for instance, when I'm talking to a fellow, I'm a registered nonpartisan, and when I'm talking to a fellow nonpartisan registered voter, what I'm saying is, you get to vote in the primary. You get to show up and you can vote for who you want to. You're not going to be told by the state that, oh, you registered as a nonpartisan. Well, sorry, on primary day, you have to register as a partisan to vote in our primary. It does away with that. We can vote for a Republican for U.S. Senate and then turn around and vote for a Democrat for a state house or state Senate, and vice versa. And so that's what we're trying to open here with our open primaries portion.
And when you guys are out campaigning for Amendment 2, are you finding that voters remember the open primary that was in effect for the first 40 years of Alaska's history up until 2002? Do people have a recollection of that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of our challenge, because we had what's known as not an open primary, but a blanket primary, right? Where everyone's on the ballot, but the Democrats are still running against the Democrats, Republicans, and so forth. That was ruled unconstitutional. So that's how it got pulled away. But a true open primary, where you're not necessarily picking the party's official quote unquote nominee, but it's really just, it's a horse race, and the first number of people the first top however many vote getters get on the ballot, that's been approved. 7-2 decision at US Supreme Court, it's settled. So our challenge is, people go, oh yeah, we used to have that, but it's illegal. And we have to explain blanket versus open. But once they know they can have it, I mean, really, apart from the real, you know, essentially people who are party operatives, it has immense appeal just across the spectrum.
That's great.
Because there's plenty of Democrats who voted for Lisa Murkowski, of course. And, you know, there's across the spectrum, people have made those choices. We're such a small state, people have those relationships.
All right, I have one more nerdy question. Bear with me, and then we're going to open it up for all of you. This is actually, I want to direct this to Shea. I read in some of the press coming out of Alaska something you said, that a positive effect of this combination of top 4 primaries with ranked choice voting in the general elections will be to make efforts to gerrymander districts less effective and important. Can you just elaborate on that? That seems like a really positive and interesting feature of this campaign.
Yeah, John, actually, unfortunately, Scott and I both have S names, and I believe that was Scott who said that. Okay. I'll let him take that on.
Okay. Sorry about that, Scott. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
Oh, no worries. I wanted to hear Shea answer it, actually. But what we've got in Alaska is, of course, you know, we've had these history of moderate Republicans, and they get elected, they get pulled out, you know, they get primaried out. Like right now, our House of Representatives is a bipartisan coalition. So the party will go in and they'll run people against the Republicans that, you know, took the chance and crossed the aisle. what they can't do anymore is rack and stack the Democrats and try to pick off districts without putting risk on themselves. So for example, we've got a guy in what we call the Matsu Valley. It's kind of if there is a racist core to Alaska, there's sort of not a racist core. That's a wrong statement. Representative Eastman out of there has made statements and been sanctioned, actually, only representative to ever be sanctioned by the House Representative for his comments about Alaska Natives. And yet he gets reelected, and he gets reelected again, and he gets reelected again. Comes from a strong Republican district where you could imagine the party looking at that district and saying, that guy's gonna win by 3,000 votes, hell or high water. We can take these 2,000 votes and we can push them north and we can pick off this Democrat. Now, if they do that now, no problem. He'll keep winning. If they do that under our system, so you've got this representative and the Democrat who just can't win that district based on the partisan makeup, but maybe you've got an independent. And when you run the ranked choice system, as that support coalesces, the Democrat perhaps drops out and that support goes to the independent, and you've basically put a safe seat in play. So the idea of redistricting becomes almost a zero-sum game for the party in control, because if you weaken your hold, it's not this binary choice, Republican or Democrat, and as long as we keep it Republican or we keep it Democrat, we keep the seat. It's, no, there's a third or even a fourth way, and this other candidate may come in and snatch that district away from you. What we've got here is our redistricting process is set in the Constitution. It's almost impossible to change. We can't initiate constitutional changes in Alaska. The legislature, both bodies have to pass it by 2/3, and then the people approve it by a majority. The legislature's never come close to fixing redistricting. So this is a way to change the outputs of the system where they're disincentivized. If they push votes around the map, maybe at the margin they can, district in this representative with that representative, but they really can't do the rack and stack you can do where you can see a 50-50 electorate and yet one party can take 2/3 of the votes just by redistricting. It just doesn't work anymore.
That's fascinating.
And
all right.
If I can add really quick, thanks for just jumping in. It makes it so much more about the candidate, and that the voters have to find out about who's willing to work hard, who's willing to be there, who actually listens and works for them, as opposed to just that letter to the name. It really, to Scott's point, Representative Eastman, not someone who, is probably deserving of a seat, but because is the Republican in the Republican district by so many votes, that's who we end up getting. But if it did shift, it does put the onus on voters to learn more about the candidates, and good candidates will most of the time end up winning. And that's really, again, for us, makes for better governance. And that's what we all want. And it's a big positive.
Great. Thanks, Jason. All right. I want to open it up for all of your questions. Again, if you have a question, just go into the chat section, type your name, your state, and a 1-sentence description of what you'd like to ask, and then I'll call on you and you can ask it. So our first question comes from Jesse Fields in New York. Question about voter participation. Go ahead, Jesse. The floor is yours.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Shea, Scott, and Jason for being here. I'm certainly very supportive of this reform. I hope it wins in November. My question is about the way that I think about reforms. One of the important accomplishments, something that reforms can help us do as communities, is to bring people together and to hold our elected officials more accountable, but also very importantly to have everybody participating. So my question is, can you speak about American Indian and Alaska Native participation in voting in Alaska today? And do you think this reform could have an impact on increasing the participation of Native Alaskans and American Indians in the political process and bringing them closer into the political process, to government, to the community, and sort of bringing people together? Because I know that there are issues, historic divisions and exclusions that I think reforms can help us overcome.
Dr. Fields, thank you very much for that question. And before I hand it over to Scott to talk to that, I think it's really important for us in Alaska to acknowledge Jason Grenn, Scott Kendall, and I are living and working on the land of the Dena'ina people. It's an important thing that we acknowledge that and the blessings that brings. But I want to toss that over to Scott Kendall to talk more to the Alaska Native participation in voting, as well as what these reforms do for the rural regions.
Yeah, and that's just a great question, because that's, I think, you know, unlike maybe any other state in the country, depending on turnout, our Alaska Native population here can produce between 15 and 20% of the overall vote.
Wow.
And the thing about, and I don't want to speak for anyone. I have a lot of very, very close relationships with a lot of Alaska Native organizations because of the groundbreaking work Governor Walker did, recognizing tribes, making a formal apology on behalf of the state of Alaska for the boarding room system or boarding school system, and a lot of the grievances and attempting to extinguish languages and so forth. But there's a real, I think I can speak so far as to say there's a real tangible feeling that neither party speaks for the Alaska Native population. We have Alaska Native populations that live on lands that are oil and gas producing, that are pro-development. We have Alaska Native populations that live a subsistence way of life still, that harvest caribou, harvest whale, harvest salmon, and live that way, and don't necessarily want resource development disrupting that way of life. And so there's been a, you know, to grossly oversimplify it, there's been a, you know, a tension between, I think, the Alaska Native population in both parties, because I think there's a desire for autonomy. There's a desire to be treated on an equal level, and the parties disrupt that artificially. So we've worked with the Alaska Federation of Natives, which is the largest, I think, Native American cohesive organization in the country. We've worked with them from the outset on this reform. We've worked with the First Alaskans Institute from the outset on this reform, because it's incredibly important to bring them to the table now. Now, in a world where the parties aren't gatekeepers to the ballot, suddenly they are part of this coalition. If you're a candidate and you want to win, you know, certainly you probably want a party, you know, some sort of party alignment, but you also want Alaska Native support. You also want labor support. You want all these different supports. So you've got to bring, you can't be, you know, for example, the Democratic candidate and take for granted you have that support. You have to bring something to the table for every interest group. So I think it supercharges their influence. They're already a force to be reckoned with. In my experience, I was Senator Murkowski's attorney in 2010 when she mounted her write-in campaign. And although I don't like super PACs, obviously from the work I do, but the super PACs that arose that ultimately perhaps saved her Senate seat were funded almost entirely by Alaska Native corporations here. They identified her as someone who stands for their values and stands up for what they believe in. And they, in the space of 6 short weeks, essentially created and mounted a multi-million-dollar campaign to help her stay in office.
Wow.
So their influence is just incredibly powerful. And I think to date have been artificially depressed by the party system.
Mhm.
And I sort of can't wait to see what happens when we take, you know, rip those things off and let, you know, the majority of Alaskans be represented. Because I think it really could be something special.
Great. Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, we have a question from John Eldon, I believe from California. John, the floor is yours.
Hi. Yeah, I think you may have answered it, but anyway, in California, we had a similar problem where we tried blanket for a while and got told that was illegal. And so we went to top 2, but that did require, in our case, an initiative by the citizens, which I guess you guys don't have, right? So I was wondering why you just didn't, why it's taking so long to get this going.
Yeah, thanks, John. And Scott, you want to take that one on?
Yeah, could you restate the question for me, Shea?
Okay. Yeah, what happened was that in California, we did an initiative and got the top 2 in after the blanket was invalidated. And so that happened relatively quickly for us. And then I'm noting you guys are, you know, you're 10 years out here and now we're finally getting around to this.
Yeah, well, I think part of it was the legal ambiguity. I think when the blanket primary was wiped out, California had to reenact their top 2 system, right. And then that had to work its way up the system before I want to say it was 2012, there was a Supreme Court decision. I might be misremembering, but it sort of wasn't on the table. And so that's sort of the dynamic. There has been, I should note, there have been state legislators who have put forward an open primary system, just never goes anywhere. It goes to a committee, it dies. And so this is sort of the, the instance where it's tough to expect the people who are elected under a certain system to change the very system they profited by. So this is where the people say, hey, yeah, you know what, that's a good idea, and we're going to take it to the streets and put it on the ballot.
Okay, good, thanks.
All right, a question from Kevin Johnson about the two-party system. Go ahead, Kevin. You're on mute, Kevin. You got to take yourself off mute. I don't know what, there you are. You're off mute now. Go ahead.
That's the part I forgot about the two-party system. Well, my thing with that was the two-party system. So when all this started out with the forefathers, I don't see anywhere where they were bent on it only being a two-party system, and they were not against an outsider that didn't fit into either one of those. At what point did it come in with those two parties that so stubborn about, like when Ross Perot came in, that was the first person I was interested in voting. But they talked bad about him, they put him down, saying that he was a kook and all of that, independent. Yeah, so I mean, when did it get to where, we're not letting any outsiders in? Doesn't seem to have been like that in the beginning. It's always up to the people.
Sure. Any thoughts on that, guys?
So if I heard you correctly, Kevin, the question is when did the two-party system start deterring more competition in campaigns and elections? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Scott, do you want to talk to the history of that? Sorry to put you on the spot again.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can't speak in the broader sense of, nationwide or anything like that, but I can speak to Alaska's had strange outcomes. As, was noted by John at the outset, we've had an awful lot of statewide elected leaders elected with a plurality because when the third parties come in, they're discouraged. They're seen as a spoiler because they're going to tilt things one way or the other, and 42% of the electorate are going to elect the individual. And we've seen that on the right. We've seen that on the left. We've seen Governor Knowles, who was a Democratic governor back in the 90s, was elected initially primarily because, essentially the Republicans split between the Republicans and the Alaska Independence Party. And there was this split over here between Republicans and perhaps more conservative Republicans. And he benefited from that. Likewise, when Senator Stevens was defeated by Senator Begich, same thing happened. Ted Stevens was running, and he had a lot of the complications around the FBI investigation to him, which ultimately was, the cases were dismissed and all of that. But the real deciding factor was Senator Stevens had someone who ran to his right as an Alaska Independence Party again, which tends to kind of be a catch-all for further right, on a lot of social issues because he wasn't far enough right. Well, he loses by 3,000 votes to Senator Begich, and the man right into his right, Bob Byrd, took 13 or 14,000 votes. And so we've had this history of you're a spoiler, you're distorting the will of the people, and this makes it so everyone can take their first choice, but then of course, when it's tabulated for your second choice, the ultimate outcome is going to be more representative. That spoiler effect is no longer a discouragement to just getting in the game and raising your issues.
All right, a question from South Dakota, from Dre Samuelson about polling. Go ahead, Dre.
The only poll of open primaries and ranked choice voting that I've seen showed that open primaries is substantially more popular than ranked choice voting. Is that true in Alaska? And are you all concerned that combining the two measures or proposals weakens the chances of passage of the entire initiative?
Yeah, I'll take that first stab at that, Dre, and then toss it to Jason and Scott. But you know, from my eyes, we're trying to put the best policy forward that will provide the most power to Alaska voters. We're trying to empower Alaska voters first and foremost, and that's the first thing that is on our mind. I will say that our polling is strong with ranked choice voting. It's been strong over the past 4 rounds, and it seems unwavering. People are ready to be able to start talking about politics again around the dinner table. They're ready to see the Walter Cronkite figures come up again and give the news how the news is supposed to be and talk about politics from a nonpartisan standpoint and an unbiased standpoint. And that's what we're focused on. Ranked choice voting and open primaries are just two peas in a pod to empowering Alaska voters, and we're excited to be a part of that. And then I'll toss it over to Scott and Jason to finish it off.
Well, this is Scott real quick before Jason. I can speak to very early in this process. I actually got involved in the process working kind of solely on open primaries, met with some ranked choice people, and just to it. One, we've kind of pulled open primaries, dark money over here by itself, and then we pulled it again with the ranked choice together. And what we found was it actually went up a point or two when we combined everything, which shocked me because I figured more, more of whatever, more words, just it starts to erode support. But the other part was truly it's designed as one system. It's not open primaries and then RCV, because if you're going to open primaries top 4, you need the ranked choice. Otherwise you got, 4 candidates over here, and you sort of run the risk that, one extreme candidate can coalesce a 29 or 30% base and actually can win. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking at majority representation, not plurality representation. So they work together, and I think the challenge that you get to, though, is a real one, in that ranked choice voting is new to Alaska. Open primaries, easy concept. Ranked choice voting, you need a 30-second explainer. And so that's our challenge, not whether it's popular or not popular, just the education aspect. It's almost more of an education campaign than a persuasion campaign.
Well, that's a good segue to our next question. Jason Ruff from Pennsylvania wanted to ask you about voter education. So go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, guys. I actually was hoping I would be next because that's a perfect segue. My name's Jason Ruff, and I'm actually running for a state representative down here in a sort of swing district within Pennsylvania, which is a swing state. So we have a lot of people thinking in terms of independent ways of thinking and unaffiliated ways of thinking. I was wondering what you guys, this is the first election, I ran in 2018 as well and I lost. But this is the first election where I'm actually hearing from a lot of voters that they are so completely disgusted with both parties. They're now calling for the abolishment of all parties, right? And I didn't hear that in 2018. So I think this momentum is going to gain steam in a lot of states around the country. But what I want to hear from you guys in terms of education, there's such a disconnect for people between independent and unaffiliated. And I see a lot of these groups out there calling themselves, Independent Pennsylvania or, other independently named organizations, but we're really talking about unaffiliated people and voters. And I honestly don't even think Pennsylvania has an official independent party. So it gets super confusing for voters. And if something is going to gain steam for voters and you really want them to buy into an idea, it can't really be confusing. So I wondered what you guys thought about all of that.
Yeah, and Jason, first off, I want to be really clear. We are not aimed at either party. We are simply aimed at empowering Alaska voters, and you'll hear me say that over and over and over again because it's the truth. We're talking, we're talking to Republicans, we're talking to Democrats, we're talking to nonpartisans. When we're educating about this, we're talking about how the two-party system has divided us and left people in the middle away, And we're talking about empowering the people within those parties to make sure that they're making decisions for those parties, and those decisions are coming from the ground up rather than the top down. Right. And with that, I'll let Jason or Scott take the rest of that question if they have anything to add.
I'll say, it's a little confusing in Alaska because we have the Alaska Independence, CE, Independence Party. So when people, myself, I ran as a non-affiliated candidate, but definitely used the term independent when I was running. I'm running as an independent. And because, the Independence Party in Alaska, doesn't have much sway. You can kind of use that usefully, and people know that you're running as an independent, not with a particular party. But you're right. I think that, so many people associate themselves as independent, non-affiliated. What's the difference? What does it mean? I think for us in Alaska, we're able to use the term, independent as, meaning non-affiliated. And so I think from an education standpoint, that's not really where we have to be focused on. It's just focused on the self, the voter themselves, what they see themselves and what they see as progress, and what they see as, how do we move forward?
Well, thank you.
All right, question from Leon Jackson in Michigan. Go ahead, Leon. Leon, you got to take yourself off mute. There you go.
Yes, my question was, will Alaska still use a primary and a general election, or just how exactly will it work? Will one election choose the candidate for the office?
So thanks for the question, Leon. What we're instituting is keeping the primary, but what we're doing right now, so under the current system, we have two separate primaries. We have a Democratic primary and we have a Republican primary. What we're instituting is an open primary where the top four vote getters move on to the general. And so then in the general, we use ranked choice voting under ballot measure 2. And so we still do have the open primary, and we still have the general. There are just slight changes to both.
All right, we have a philosophical policy question from Harry Kresge in New York. Harry, go ahead, you're on.
Hi, John, how are you? And hi to everybody, this is a great discussion. Obviously on its face, open primaries is better because everybody votes on the same footing. My question has more to do with the fact that the COVID virus has exposed how badly America is performing in a very vital area with dramatic effects on people. So I'd be eager to hear what our panelists think about, or how would you make the argument that we'd be doing better in such a vital area if we had an election system that was less partisan and was less organized around the political parties?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll give that over to Scott and Jason to take that one on.
Yeah, this is Scott real quick, and I think Jason can speak better to this because he was a member of a bipartisan coalition. But the biggest problem with the two-party system is it creates a winner and a loser. It's not enough to solve a problem. The other side has to fail to solve it. What this does is it just creates a big, wide open bipartisan space or nonpartisan space where you can work on whether it's COVID, whether it's budget challenges, whether it's immigration policy, any of these issues that sort of become binary issues between the two parties. You can move into the middle and you can work with someone from the other party or from no party to solve them. So without sort of reflecting on any particular crisis, I do think it creates a much more fertile ground for more people to work together on big problems and not worry about just stymieing the other side, but rather being responsible for a solution.
Yeah, I'll quickly echo that. Everything, we went forward with policy. The question I always asked was, what's the problem we're trying to solve? then how do we solve that in a way that's based in data, it's based in science, analytical, viewpoints, talking to experts. And what that does really is take the politics out of things. So when you vote yay, nay, if it's, in Alaska, if it's oil taxes, or if it's education spending, whatever that means, I can go back and tell voters that, here's a step-by-step, here's how we approach this, here's how we wanted to solve the problem. It didn't mean, if I voted no on oil taxes, that doesn't, signify that I'm, a big red jersey or blue jersey. What it means is I took the time to research it, took my duty seriously as a representative, and did the work through analytical viewpoints. I think to your point, going, well, if you're very partisan, you're on one side or the other, and dug in and have to show yourself to be that way to earn re-election, it doesn't allow for data, it doesn't allow for problem solving. It simply means you have to vote a certain way to earn those votes, and that's not solving the problem. That's just making sure you get back in your seat, which if you're a public servant and someone who cares about your community, which was important to me, that's not the way you want your representative to act. So I think something like this, with open primaries, ranked choice voting, you can go back to all voters and say, here is the process, as opposed to, well, I voted a certain way because I'm an X, X letter.
Just to add my own thoughts on that question, I think in my mind, when you have a crisis, what you want and need from your leaders is honesty, courage, seriousness, and a capacity to focus on moving things forward instead of scoring political points. And one thing we've noticed is that when you force elected officials to run in a partisan primary, particularly a closed one, but even a semi-opened one, when you force them to genuflect before the party, you end up with elected officials who are unable to be courageous and honest. And I just think that's across the board, and more people are noticing that. So my hope in Alaska is that you remove that, you empower people to do the people's business, including responding to these terrible tragedies and crises like the COVID-19 crisis. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. We have time for one more question, actually two more questions, and then we're gonna wrap up here. This is a question from Mike Otten in New York. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, first, thanks for calling us together. It's really exciting to hear about what's happening in Alaska, and it's good news, although it never seems like it's happening fast enough. But I'm wondering if there's support from Al Gross, the independent Democratic senator candidate. Has he been involved or supportive of your efforts?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mr. Otten. We haven't sought his endorsement out yet. I don't know if he is supportive or not. He's been focused on his election and getting to November, just like we've been focused on ours. And I can't say much more. We've been in conversations with both sides of each campaign and each election, from U.S. Senate down to State House, and we're finding that people on both sides really are jumping to support us. We're finding strong support. People who are running in races who have never run before are saying, yeah, the system right now is ludicrous. We don't treat candidates the same. We don't treat voters the same. How do we expect to get anything done when in some districts only 25% or 15% of the district actually decide who their elected leaders are? More to John Updike's point of, we have to elect a leader. That's exactly it. We have to elect the leader. We don't elect the party. We elect someone who is going to put our state and their constituents first and make sure that we have a system in front of us that really puts constituents' concerns and what they want first. And that's what this is all about. And John, I don't want to mess up your system, but we have an Alaskan on here, Alex Copland, who asked a question. I was wondering if
he's the
sweet
final
deal.
question.
Yes,
he's the final
that's
question.
awesome. I just want to make sure he's on here.
Oh no, he's going to wrap us up. So Alex, that's your cue.
Sweet,
Alex from Homer, Alaska. Go ahead. You got the floor.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you. We've been busy here on the Kenai trying to get voting more accessible with COVID, and it's working. But my question is, what I've heard about Measure 2 is most of the money's coming mostly from outside resources and outside of Alaska. And I know that people are concerned about this and also where that money is coming from too. And so that message somehow needs to be related. I'm all in favor of Measure 2. And the second part of my question is, what strategies, even though you've talked a little bit, what are you planning on doing to promote this measure forward? Because I haven't seen a lot of it, and I'm pretty involved in a lot of this stuff. Thank you. And thanks for doing this forum.
Yeah, Alex, it's an honor to be in front of you, and thanks for hopping on today. I know the work you guys are doing down on the Kenai with mail-in ballots for your municipal elections and the fight that is. It's a great fight, and I'm glad we have someone down there doing it. As to the outside influence, you know, people want to talk about our backers. People want to talk about the people supporting us, and they talk about the outsiders, but they forget the part that we were required to turn in 29,000 signatures from around the state, and we turned that in January. We didn't only turn in 29,000, we turned in 41,000 plus, and we made sure to get not only 35 districts per statute requirement, but we got all 40 districts. We have over 150 individual Alaska donors right now, which is more than most campaigns. I would say 90% of ballot measures in the past decade in Alaska. We are supported through and through. Our backers are through and through Alaskans. And we had a great idea that we brought to some people outside who wanted to give us some resources to get that message out. And to your point of how we're going to get that message out during the crazy times that we're in, just like any other campaign, we're going to put money into digital, we're going to put money into TV, we're going to get in front of voters in any way possible that is healthy and not spreading the pandemic that's going around right now. We plan to go heavily on digital, but we're also going to be present. We were at the Soldotna Wednesday market 2 weeks ago, I believe. I was down there talking to people, and just through and through in Soldotna, we had people coming up asking questions, really curious. And when we talked to them about the measures, how we're talking to this group, people said, yeah, that makes sense. These are common sense reforms. And so we are just trying to get in front of as many people as possible. And up until now, we've had, you know, challenges with the Supreme Court, we won. Challenges with the legislative session, we won. Challenges with getting signatures, we turned them in earlier than any campaign in the state of Alaska. So we really are moving forward and getting in front of people in a safe and healthy way. And if anything you have to add, Scott and Jason, and then Alex, I wanted to make sure that you saw I dropped my cell phone over to you in case you want to give us a call.
No, the only thing I would add to Shea's comments is something I think he touched on, which is this policy was created in Alaska, for Alaska, by Alaskans. And of course, we've accepted the generous support of our outside supporters, but it really was something that organically was, you know, I was one of the attorneys helping write it, and it was an Alaska team. The other thing is, in terms of, you know, living up to our ideals, you know, we're not only relying on the current Alaska campaign disclosure law to talk about how we are financed. We link our reports on our own website. We say, you want disclosure, here it is. We're going to live up to the world as we think it should be through our ballot measure. So I think, you know, very much, you know, show, not say, and I think the campaign is living up to that so far.
Thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out from your busy days to share. This is really exciting. This is a great campaign. As people see in the chat, you can learn more by going to alaskansforbetterelections.com. We're going to be sending a follow-up email with information about the campaign. Please, we've learned this, that there's ways that people who live in North Dakota and Virginia and Georgia can support efforts in other states by referring friends that live in state, by making donations, by sharing on social media. I would argue, to the outside money question, we're one movement. There's a national political reform movement, and we all have to come together to support these efforts. So please find ways to support the Alaskans for Better Elections effort. Thank you. We will see you next week. We're going to talk about Nebraska next week. Thank you all for coming, and have a great day.
Thank you, John.